Cultural appropriation.
Ah, yes. Halloween is around the corner, isn't it? Then 'tis the season to dwell on cultural appropriation. Proceed.
That's a term that's been thrown around a lot these days. And Halloween's coming up, and Halloween's another perfect time for people to bring it up again.
People. Why are you saying people? Why aren't you saying me? Oh, unless you're speaking in opposition to the idea?
So maybe you want to avoid being that person that wears a super offensive costume.
Not in opposition. A proponent of the idea. Got it.
Unless you're trying to purposely be offensive.
Oh, so if I'm purposefully trying to be offensive, it's okay? And if I have no intention to be offensive, it's not okay? That sounds a bit backwards to me.
So cultural appropriation has a negative connotation to it.
You don't say.
It is defined as the unacknowledged or inappropriate adoption of the customs, practices, ideas, etc. of one people or society by members of another and typically more dominant people or society.
Unacknowledged. How is that determined then, may I ask? Inappropriate. As determined by whom, exactly? Typically. So, not always. All right, so who divines whether someone has or has not acknowledged the adoption of another culture? Who determines what is or is not appropriate? And if it's typically, when isn't it the case?
The way I see it, cultural appropriation is a problem because even though we like to say that we see each other as equals, over the years society has placed everybody or groups of people onto different levels on an imaginary hierarchy based on our differences due to race or culture or ethnic background, whatever you want to call it.
Okay. So dividing people up by race or culture or ethnic background is bad. Restricting people to set levels in society is an inequality. Got it. Now, let us all be sure to remember this point for later.
So then when someone in a position of power adopts a look that belongs to a group or is unique to a group of people that are typically on the receiving end of discrimination, then that is seen as reinforcing that power dynamic, even when it's unintentional.
Right. So, for example, Asian Americans, by and large, have the second highest amount of average wealth in the United States, thus placing our speaker in a relative position of greater power than, say, Italians, who earn about a third of what they do. So by the provided definition, it is wrong for our speaker to be wearing eyeglasses, which were invented in Italy. And even if our speaker has no idea that this is where eyeglasses originated from, even if she does not mean to express dominance over Italians while she is wearing them, she is still guilty of cultural appropriation. Got it.
But then when it's done in a way that's misrepresentative, disrespectful, then it's definitely wrong.
Misrepresentative. Disrespectful. As determined by whom?
So then what about dressing as a character that happens to be a different ethnicity than you? I think it can be totally fine. It depends on the character, and you have to know which lines that you can't cross.
Which lines I can't cross. All right. Which lines am I not allowed to cross? Where are these lines detailed in the law? And who enforces my not crossing these lines?
For example, if you are naturally light-skinned and you were dressing as a character that happened to be dark-skinned, even though it would complete the costume, you probably shouldn't paint your face or skin darker because that has racist historical implications.
Racist historical implications. Light skin to dark skin. Well, what about dark skin to light skin? Or can only people of a certain skin tone cross this line? Because, that notion itself has racist implications.
But then, if you did it the other way around, technically, it's not that offensive because it doesn't have the same racist historical implications.
Oh, so you do agree that people of a certain skin color should be given a pass for imitating people of a different skin color, but not vice versa, because that would be racist. You do know that racism can involve the denigration and or the elevation of one race over another, don't you?
I don't know. You can let me know what you think about that.
I am very glad to know that you are open to comments and criticism in response to your video.
Some of you might argue that it's honest cultural appreciation and not appropriation. I would believe it. Some people are genuinely they like the clothing of that culture. But I think Halloween is just not the day to do it. There's so many other days that you can show your cultural appreciation.
Appreciation versus appropriation. Okay, how exactly do you determine when it is one versus the other? How do you read minds exactly? And why is Halloween so special?
On Halloween, I think people dress up just to dress up. There isn't really a bigger purpose, so it trivializes things.
So, wait. You acknowledge that most people are just dressing up to dress up on Halloween, that there's no bigger purpose or agenda. Yet it is inappropriate and racist to dress up as something you are not on Halloween. I'm confused.
So here are some examples I found when I went to a local Halloween store. I think these are pretty typical costumes that you find almost any Halloween store. So this one's a pretty common one to see, sexy Indian princess or native princess. Well, first of all, Indian is kind of the wrong term to use here.
Language policing. Yes, all sexy Halloween costumes should be mandated to be politically correct. Got it.
And then it really sexualizes the clothing.
The sexy Indian princess costume sexualizes the clothing. You don't say.
And it's just wrong because they've been on the receiving end of so much discrimination. And now it's like, oh, you can just put on their clothing for a night. I think it's a no-go, no matter what, at least in this point in history.
Okay, so attire that originates in any way from cultures that have been discriminated against at any point in history should not be worn by anyone other than the people from that culture. Got it. So, a question for our speaker. Have Italians ever been discriminated against?
This is another actually common one, to dress as a Mexican. It's really weird that a whole group of people, a whole culture is just a costume. And it can be boiled down into like one look. You know, a lot of it is just stereotypes.
Yes, it's almost comical, isn't it? It's so over the top that no reasonable person would look at it and think it to be an authentic representation of a Mexican. I mean, you would have to be really, really shallow to look at that costume and think to yourself, wow, there goes a Mexican.
Arabian beauty, desert beauty, yeah, same thing.
I think the only thing that costume is appropriating is the fine line of a trademark violation with Disney. Or can't you tell it's just a generic knockoff of Princess Jasmine?
Dragon geisha. I think the thing is, like, they don't even get some of these costumes accurate. It's kind of like it's just everything that they think is this culture, and they just kind of like put it together.
So wait, if it was an entirely accurate recreation of clothing from a particular culture, then that wouldn't be cultural appropriation? Is that what you mean?
And gangsta braids. I don't know, like, what? First of all, it just kind of assumes that all gangsters like look like that, but then some people like have braids and are not gangsters. Like, it looks like it's meant to be a joke, which is kind of rude.
Okay, see, this is why, well, beyond the obvious, that it is frustrating to watch this video. Our speaker does understand that none of what she is complaining about is meant to be taken seriously, especially on Halloween, where everyone understands that it is a costume, that it is a joke. And yet she still promotes the idea that it is a moral wrong and a thought crime to do so.
Like, from my point of view as Chinese, I don't want to see anybody wearing a rice paddy or rice field hat as a costume if you're not Asian yourself, at least. It's typically ridiculed.
Okay, why are you wearing glasses then? If you're Chinese, and I'll take your word for it that you are, and not actually an American citizen by birth, then why are you flagrantly sporting Italian culture?
So anyway, I think the main things that you should consider are, one, if any part of the costume that you're thinking of, if that person of that background wore it, they may be ridiculed for, but if you wear it, it's fine, then it's probably inappropriate.
Oh, are these the lines that we are not allowed to cross? Excellent. So, if any part of a costume, if it were something that someone from the culture of origin would be ridiculed for wearing, then I shouldn't wear it. Like rice paddy hats. Well, here's a photo from 2011 of rice paddy farmers. Do you think that they are worried about being ridiculed for wearing those hats? Doesn't seem like it to me. And that aside, how could I possibly know what any part of a costume might engender ridicule? Who should be signing off on what is or is not appropriate for me to wear?
Number two, think about the group of people that you belong to and the group of people that the costume comes from, and whether an unfair power dynamic is being reinforced here. If so, it's not okay.
The group I come from. I think you mean demographic. Chinese people are not a group, just as an example. And also, as before, given the average abundance of economical power Asian Americans possess in this country, I guess you're not allowed to wear practically anything on Halloween, are you?
But if you're taking from a culture generally seen as being the dominant or majority, then it's probably okay.
Aha! So, in Detroit, Michigan, it's just fine for a white person to dress up in blackface and gangsta braids? Got it.
And number three, if you want to show cultural appreciation, do it on a day other than Halloween. Hopefully one day the term cultural appropriation won't even be a thing anymore. But until then,
You'll keep holding people accountable for thought crime and racist motives over the things they choose to wear, whether they do so in appreciation or in mockery.
Anyway, I'd love to hear all your perspectives on this topic. Let me know if something I said doesn't sit right with you.
And again, in all sincerity, I am appreciative that you are open to comment and criticism, so props to you for that. But here's the thing. Earlier, you said this.
The way I see it, cultural appropriation is a problem because even though we like to say that we see each other as equals, over the years society has placed everybody or groups of people onto different levels on an imaginary hierarchy based on our differences due to race or culture or ethnic background, whatever you want to call it.
But then you go on to tell us that wearing, appreciating, or appropriating anything from a culture that you yourself do not belong to is inappropriate and or disrespectful and or racist. So, as far as I can tell, your message is that different cultures need to be divided, that only like can participate in or appreciate like, that any crossover, any mingling of cultures, even in jest, even explicitly for fun, should not be allowed. From all that you have said, you want people placed onto different levels based on dominance and or how much they may have been discriminated against and or whatever may be an implication of racism. That's the problem with those who make cultural appropriation a moral crime. You are promoting and enforcing division, not equality, not free expression, not community. You are calling for socially mandated tribalism. America is known as the melting pot, where peoples and cultures from all over the world have come together to mingle and to share, just like you're Asian and living where there were once no Asians, just like you're wearing eyeglasses, just like you're using the internet. If you are meaning to dictate to the rest of us that we can never share, that we can never mingle, that we can never come to an understanding of one another, how does that help at all in reaching equality? As always, thank you for watching.